The New York Times of April 13th, 2013 reports that when they interviewed the oldest couple, they had answered to one of their questions on how they kept their relationship so strong. Quite frankly, we grew up in a generation where we never threw out something that was quote unquote broken. We fixed it. And indeed, these type of ideals can be applied to the Arab Spring, in which when one government was seen as unfit, they were ousted until a new government came along, in which they tried to satisfy all, and unfortunately, this has actually led to a collapse. And although this type of analysis and analogy may seem far-fetched, strange enough, it could be applied in the same type of terms, and therefore, when looking at the Arab Spring, a 2011 revolt coming from Tunisia after a man had self-immolated himself, we can see that this situation has quite frankly exploded. No pun intended, and when the situation has only gotten worse in countries such as Syria, Egypt, and Jordan, it's a necessity to ask ourselves today's question: has the Arab Spring truly failed? And the answer to this question is unfortunately yes, for the following three reasons. First, because of the situation going on currently with the coup in Egypt that had happened just a few months ago. Secondly, because of Syria's revolt and how Bashar al-Assad has been taking the lead. And lastly, because of future precautions with parliamentary elections going on in Arab countries. But first, we have to look to the situation going on in Egypt. Indeed, Hosni Mubarak was a president of more than 30 years, and he was ousted in 2011 during the beginning of the Arab Spring Revolt. Mohamed Morsi was also ousted after only 2 years of presidency, where he had asked for a decree in which he had ultimate power, and the people began to become a little more cautious. Indeed, according to the New York Times, dated April 19th, 2013, they saw the situation as a power grab, and unfortunately many leaders within his cabinet have actually began to resign, to which many people had saw a coup to be the only possible solution. Now, when looking to the economy, we can clearly see that this Arab Spring has failed significantly, because according to the International Monetary Fund of July of 2013, we see that their economy had hit an all-time low, even surpassed that of when the economy was about to collapse in 2011, in July of 2013. Indeed, the economy's instability has held strong, and with the country itself unable to hold itself together, the Arab Spring has ultimately failed, because the country itself has seen itself at ends, with the government itself not being given a chance, and when the government was ousted out, the economy began to fall, and therefore the Arab Spring has solved nothing. It's under martial law, which is influenced by the United States, and in long term this is going to cause backlash. So therefore the Arab Spring is going to has failed. But secondly, we have to look to the situation going on in Syria. Indeed, Bashar al-Assad has been trying to be ousted since the Arab Spring has began in 2011. And indeed, when looking at the situation, more than 700,000 Syrians have been killed already, according to the BBC's estimate of August of 2013. Now, indeed, when looking at the situation, so many have been killed already, and the situation doesn't look like the tables are turning, with the rebels losing an upper hand and Bashar al-Assad gaining an upper hand. We can clearly see that the situation is not beneficial for the people. Now, furthermore, we look to an economist report of May of 2013, the reports or the that report states that that cluster bombs and aerial maneuvers have in fact been on the benefit of the side of the government. And with the government having strong air power, this is exactly what the rebels have been fighting against. And the rebels are for the people. And unfortunately, with the rebels losing an upper hand, Syrians leaving the country and going into countries such as Jordan, Turkey, and overpopulating them have actually doubled. And therefore, the situation going on in Syria is only getting worse, and Bashar al-Assad is only clinging to power even harder, even stronger. And therefore, the situation is overall showing that the Arab Spring has indeed failed. But lastly, we have to examine the situation for the Lastly, we have to examine the unfortunate event of the fact that the future elections are going to hold instability for the government. Indeed, according to a Harvard law, rather a Carnegie Endowment for International Peace report dated of August of 2013, the Arab Spring has had long-term effects up until this day. And the reason for this is because many government officials and others who are applying in the elections are looking to, in fact, please all the people. And unfortunately, this is not going to happen because you can't centralize all these powers. These powers can't be centralized, and all the needs can't be centralized. Either they're going to lean to the left or lean to the right. And unfortunately, they've led many people to lean towards the middle, and unfortunately this is decreasing transparency between the elections, and in the long term this is going to cause them to become much too cautious because they're going to be focusing on rebellions rather than their platform, and unfortunately this is overall going to lead for the Arab Spring to have failed effects in the future. So therefore, for the three reasons that we've discussed, we have to understand that the Arab Spring has indeed failed. First, because of the Egyptian crisis. Secondly, because of Syria and the Syrian crisis. And lastly, because of the decrease of transparency within the elections and the future processes happening due to this. Therefore, we can clearly see that unfortunately the Arab Spring, which had noble intentions, has clearly failed.